In March 2023, the British government announced that it will send depleted uranium ammunition to Ukraine in a move that is sure to draw fire from critics of the controversial weapon. Russian leaders quickly denounced the move as escalatory. If all this happens, Russia will have to respond accordingly, given that the West collectively is already beginning to use weapons with a nuclear component, warned Russian President Vladimir Putin. First deployed on a large scale during the Gulf War, the U.S. military used depleted uranium for tank armor and some bullets due to its high density, helping it to penetrate enemy armored vehicles. Depleted uranium is a byproduct of the uranium enrichment process where the ratio of natural uranium isotopes from the Earth's crust is enriched with higher energy uranium isotopes to produce uranium suitable for use in nuclear reactors. Due to its extreme density, depleted uranium is used as armor plating. It is also used in penetrator kinetic energy munitions, for its mass and pyrophoric properties under conditions of extreme temperature and pressure. 782,414 depleted uranium rounds were fired during the 1991 war in Iraq, mostly by U.S. forces. In a 3-week period of conflict in Iraq during 2003, it was estimated that between 1,000 and 2,000 tons of depleted uranium munitions were used. More than 300,000 depleted uranium rounds were fired during the 2003 war, the vast majority by U.S. troops. Officials have confirmed that the U.S. military, despite vowing not to use depleted uranium weapons on the battlefield in Iraq and Syria, fired thousands of rounds of the munitions during 2 high-profile raids on oil trucks in Islamic State-controlled Syria in late 2015. The air assaults marked the first confirmed use of this armament since the 2003 Iraq invasion, when it was used hundreds of thousands of times. The taller of the two, below, left, is 25 mm round fired by the Bushmaster cannon on the Army's Bradley fighting vehicle. When fired, the segmented plastic cap and sabot fall away, leaving the penetrator, a pencil-sized rod of uranium, along with stabilizing fins, as the only projectile. The threaded bottom portion of the depleted uranium rod is used to attach the fins. The 30 mm round with the red cap is employed by the U.S. Air Force's A-10, aka the Warthog. Fired by the plane's GAU-8 cannon at a rate of up to 4,800 rounds per minute, its primary function is to destroy enemy tanks. Uranium metal's high density provides the penetrator with momentum and a straight trajectory, something almost impossible to stop. Tungsten, which has a similar density to uranium, can also be used, but depleted uranium has greater target penetration. Unlike tungsten, uranium is pyrophoric. It also has a lower melting point than tungsten. As a depleted uranium penetrator strikes a target, its surface temperature increases dramatically. This causes localized softening in what are known as adiabatic shear bands and a sloughing off of portions of the projectile's surface. This keeps the tip sharp and prevents the mushrooming effect that occurs with tungsten. When the depleted uranium penetrates the target vehicle, the larger fragments tend to chew up whatever is inside, while the pyrophoricity of the uranium increases the likelihood that the vehicle's fuel and/or ammunition will explode. The technical term used to describe these events is behind the target effectiveness. Some versions of the Army's M1A1 tank fire large 120 mm depleted uranium rounds. Until recently, the Navy's Phalanx system employed small 20 mm depleted uranium rounds to shoot down incoming missiles. The current version of the Phalanx system employs tungsten rounds rather than depleted uranium. Some Gulf War, Bosnia, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom, and Operation New Dawn veterans may have been exposed to depleted uranium when they were, on, in, or near vehicles hit with friendly fire, entering or near burning vehicles, near fires involving depleted uranium munitions, or salvaging damaged vehicles. When a projectile made with depleted uranium penetrates a vehicle, small particles of depleted uranium can be formed and breathed in or swallowed by service members in the struck vehicle. Small depleted uranium fragments can also scatter and become embedded in muscle and soft tissue. Health problems associated with depleted uranium. The potential for health effects from internal exposure is related to the amount of depleted uranium that enters a person's body. Inhaled depleted uranium particles are likely cleared from the lungs over several years. Depleted uranium fragments may remain for many years. Older studies in uranium manufacturing workers show high exposures to uranium may especially affect the kidneys. Radiation can cause radiation sickness due to immediate tissue damage. Such damage is seen after radiotherapy, industrial accidents, and use of nuclear weapons. Rapidly reproducing cells, such as those in the lining of the gut, the bone marrow, and the skin, are most affected. Very severe exposure causes tissue destruction and is rapidly fatal. Radiation can cause mutations in DNA, which increases the risk of cancer. The risk is usually assumed to increase with the dose with no minimum threshold. Doctors in Iraq are recording a sharp rise in the number of cancer victims south of Baghdad. Sufferers in the province of Babil have risen almost tenfold in just 3 years. Locals blame depleted uranium from U.S. military equipment used in the 2003 invasion. Some 500 cases of cancer were diagnosed in 2004 alone. That figure rose to almost 1,000 2 years later. In 2008, the number of cases increased sevenfold to 7,000 diagnoses. And the number is rising. Iraqi researchers believe radiation is responsible for the increase in cancer and birth defects in the country. The 15 tons of depleted uranium that ended up in southern Serbia still affect the entire region, including North Macedonia, Albania, and Bulgaria. Many people were exposed and got cancer. Depleted uranium in weapons could cause long-term environmental contamination. In some instances, the levels of contamination in food and groundwater could rise after some years and should be monitored and appropriate measures taken where there is a reasonable possibility of significant quantities of depleted uranium entering the food chain. The two common principles of disposing hazardous waste are to construct landfills that are isolated by clay-based liners covering the waste mass and underlying it for separation from the groundwater, or to place the waste underground and isolate it from the surrounding rock or soil by clay or concrete. The most strongly contaminated waste, classified as low-level waste with a required time of isolation of 300 years, can preferably be placed in clay-isolated concrete vaults.